Welcome back, everyone, to English with Justin, the podcast where we help you improve your English, one conversation at a time. I'm your host, Justin, and today we're diving into episode number 7. Our topic today is something super useful for travelers: learning English vocabulary about the airport. To help us break it down, we've got a special guest, Josh, who's joining us to share his insights and experiences with airport lingo. Josh, welcome to the show.
Hey Justin, thanks for having me. I'm excited to help listeners get comfortable with all the essential terms they'll need at the airport.
It's going to be a great episode, so stick around if you want to feel confident navigating an airport in English. Let's get started.
Thanks for having me, Justin. I'm really excited to talk about this because airports can be a bit overwhelming, especially if you're not familiar with the language.
Absolutely. So let's jump right into it. When people first arrive at the airport, what are some important words they need to know right off the bat?
Well, one of the first things you'll see is the check-in counter. This is where you go to get your boarding pass and drop off your luggage. You'll often hear the terms departure and arrival as well, which are key for understanding flight schedules.
Great starting point. And after checking in, what should travelers be listening for in English as they move through the airport?
Once you've checked in, you'll head to security or security checkpoint. That's where they check your bags and make sure you're following safety rules. After that, you'll find your gate, which is where you'll board your flight.
And those are definitely words travelers will hear a lot: gate, boarding, and of course, boarding pass.
Exactly. And don't forget about announcements over the loudspeakers. Words like delay, canceled, or final boarding are important to understand, so you don't miss your flight.
Yes, those can make or break your trip. We'll dive deeper into more specific phrases and some useful tips right after this quick break. We're here with Josh, talking about essential airport vocabulary. Before the break, we covered check-in, security, and gates, along with a few important announcements you'll hear over the loudspeakers. Now, Josh, let's talk about what happens when passengers are boarding. What are some key words or phrases travelers should be familiar with?
When it's time to board, you'll often hear terms like boarding group. Airlines usually call passengers by groups based on their ticket type. You might also hear priority boarding, which means passengers who paid extra or have special status get on the plane first.
Right? So it's good to pay attention to which boarding group you're in. Another word I've heard a lot is carry-on. What does that mean?
Good question. A carry-on is the bag you take with you onto the plane. It's usually smaller and fits in the overhead compartment or under the seat in front of you. You might also hear personal item, which is typically a smaller bag like a backpack or a purse.
That's helpful. So after boarding, passengers often hear phrases related to the flight itself, like in-flight services. What exactly does that include?
In-flight services refers to everything the airline offers during the flight, like food, drinks, entertainment, and even Wi-Fi. You might hear the flight attendants make announcements about these services or ask you to fasten your seatbelt when the plane is getting ready to take off.
Yeah, that's a big one. Fasten your seatbelt is something you'll hear often, especially during takeoff and landing.
Exactly. And another term to know is turbulence. It's when the plane shakes due to air pressure changes, and passengers are usually asked to stay seated with their seatbelts fastened.
Good point. Turbulence can be unsettling if you're not used to it, but it's totally normal. Let's shift to what happens after you land. What are some important words and phrases for that part of the trip?
When you land, you'll likely head to baggage claim, where you pick up your checked luggage. You'll also see signs for customs and immigration, which are where they check your passport and sometimes ask you questions about your trip.
That's crucial for international travelers. Understanding those terms can really help avoid confusion when you're going through different procedures after landing.
Definitely. And once you're through customs and immigration, you'll usually head to the arrivals area, where people meet passengers coming off the flight.
Awesome. This has been super useful so far. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll dive into even more specific phrases and some tips on how to practice your airport vocabulary before you travel. Stay tuned. And we're back on English with Justin. Thanks for sticking with us. I'm here with Josh, and we're talking about essential airport vocabulary for travelers. So far, we've covered everything from check-in to baggage claim. Now, let's dive into more specific phrases that can come in handy during your airport experience. Josh, earlier we mentioned things like boarding groups and in-flight services. But let's say a traveler has a problem at the airport, like a delayed flight or lost luggage. What kind of vocabulary would they need to know in those situations?
Great question. One of the most important things to know is how to talk to customer service at the airport. If your flight is delayed, you might hear the term rebooking, which means the airline is offering to move you to a different flight. You might also need to ask about compensation if the delay is long or your flight is canceled.
That's good to know. Rebooking and compensation are definitely important. What about lost luggage? That's a stressful situation for a lot of travelers.
Yeah, it happens more often than people think. If your luggage doesn't show up, you'd want to go to the lost and found or the airline's baggage services. You'll probably need to fill out a claim form for lost baggage. Some airlines will offer to deliver your luggage to you once they find it.
That sounds really useful. So, knowing those terms can make things a little less stressful in those kinds of situations. What about communicating with airport staff? How can travelers make sure they're being understood?
The key is to keep things simple and clear. If you need help, try phrases like, "Can you help me with?" or "Where is?" followed by whatever you're looking for, like the check-in counter or the gate. Another good one is, "What time is boarding?" That way, you can get the information you need quickly.
That's great advice. Keeping it simple can make communication a lot easier, especially in busy places like airports. Before we wrap up, Josh, do you have any tips for listeners on how they can practice airport vocabulary before traveling?
Definitely. One thing I recommend is watching YouTube videos or listening to podcasts about travel, especially ones where they use real airport language. You can also practice by role-playing different scenarios with a friend. For example, pretend you're checking in for a flight or asking about a delayed flight. The more you practice, the more confident you'll feel.
That's a great way to build confidence. And for those of you listening, don't forget to write down key phrases or new words you come across during your practice. The more you see and use the words, the better you'll remember them.
Exactly. And even if you can't practice with a friend, just saying the phrases out loud to yourself can help you get more comfortable with them.
That's such a helpful tip. All right, Joss, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sure our listeners have learned a lot about airport vocabulary and feel more prepared for their next trip. Let's expand on some additional useful airport vocabulary for travelers. 1. Terminal. Meaning, a large building where passengers either arrive or depart from a flight. Airports can have multiple terminals. Example, your flight departs from Terminal 3. 2. Concourse. Meaning, a large hallway or area within the airport where gates are located. It connects passengers to their boarding areas. Example, follow the signs to Concourse B for your gate. 3. Boarding pass. Meaning, a document or ticket that allows you to get on the airplane. It usually has information like the flight number, boarding time, and gate. Example: please have your boarding pass ready for inspection. 4. Layover. Meaning, a stop between flights when traveling from one destination to another. This usually happens when there's no direct flight. Example: I have a 2-hour layover in London before my next flight. 5. Connecting flight. Meaning, a flight you take after a layover to reach your final destination. Example: after landing in Paris, I have a connecting flight to New York. 6. Passport control. Meaning, the area where your passport is checked when you enter or leave a country. Example: after landing, I need to go through passport control before picking up my luggage. 7. Visa. Meaning, a legal document or stamp that allows you to enter and stay in a specific country for a certain period of time. Example: make sure to apply for a visa before traveling to the US. 8. Customs declaration. Meaning, a form you fill out when entering a country where you declare items you're bringing with you, especially expensive or restricted items. Example: you need to fill out a customs declaration form before going through customs. 9. Tarmac. Meaning, the area where planes park, take off, and land. Passengers may sometimes board or disembark directly from the tarmac. Example: we had to wait on the tarmac for 20 minutes before taking off. 10. Overbooked. Meaning, when an airline sells more tickets than there are seats on a flight, passengers may be asked to take a different flight. Example: the flight is overbooked, so they're asking for volunteers to take a later flight. 11. Jet lag. Meaning, the tiredness and confusion you feel after traveling across different time zones. Example: I have jet lag after my long flight from Tokyo. 12. Flight attendant. Meaning, a person who helps passengers on the plane with safety instructions, food, drinks, and other needs. Example: the flight attendant will show you how to use the oxygen mask. Number 13. On time, delayed, canceled. Meaning, words used to describe whether a flight is happening as scheduled, late, or not happening at all. Example: our flight is on time, but there's a chance of it being delayed due to bad weather. 14. Gate agent. Meaning, an airline staff member at the gate who helps passengers with boarding, upgrades, and last-minute flight changes. Example: the gate agent said they'll start boarding in 10 minutes. 15. Seatbelt sign. Meaning, a sign that lights up when passengers are required to fasten their seatbelts. Example: the seatbelt sign is on because we're experiencing turbulence. Number 16. Baggage carousel. Meaning, a moving belt where luggage is placed for passengers to collect after their flight. Example: our bags should arrive at baggage carousel 5. 17. Duty-free. Meaning, stores at airports where you can buy goods without paying taxes, typically for international travelers. Example: I picked up some perfume from the duty-free shop. 18. Upgrade. Meaning, moving to a higher class of service, such as from economy to business class. Example: I got an upgrade to first class. 19. Standby. Meaning, passengers who do not have a confirmed seat and are waiting to see if there's availability on a flight. Example: I'm on standby for the next flight to Chicago. 20. Carry-on restrictions. Meaning, rules about what items and sizes of bags are allowed in the cabin. Example: liquids in your carry-on must be under 100 milliliters. These additional terms should be very helpful for English learners navigating an airport. Thanks again, everyone, for listening to episode 7 of English with Justin. We hope today's discussion on airport vocabulary has helped you feel more confident about navigating the airport in English. Whether it's understanding announcements, checking in, or dealing with any unexpected situations, these words and phrases will definitely come in handy. And a special thanks to Josh for joining us today and sharing such practical tips. Remember, learning English is all about consistent practice, so try to review and use these terms the next time you're preparing for a trip. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to the podcast, leave us a review, and share it with your friends. You can also follow us on social media for more English learning tips and updates on upcoming episodes. And if you have any questions or suggestions for future topics, feel free to reach out. We'd love to hear from you. All right, that's it for today. Thanks again for tuning in. And as always, keep practicing your English. We'll be back with more helpful lessons soon. Until then, take care and safe travels.